Hey everybody, welcome to Life Groups. Right now we're going to take some time to learn from the Bible so that you can take time to talk about what's going on with your life and how it bumps up against God's truth. I hope you've had a great time so far. Let's get into week 2 of our series called Family Matters. Well, welcome back everybody. This is week 2 of Family Matters, and last week we talked about how family is complicated, and that may be the understatement of the century, that family is complicated, but it is important to acknowledge family's complicated. My family's complicated, your family's complicated, and there's a wide range of that complication. What yours might look like is complicated is drastically different than mine, but it doesn't take away from the fact that you and I have different dynamics in our families, and we play different roles. Our faith plays a role, though, no matter what kind of role we play. You may be the historian of your family, that when an argument jumps up, or if people begin to talk about something that's even fun, you bring back some of the memories. You may be the instigator. Things are boring, and so you need to shake things up. Whatever your role is, your faith plays an important role too. And no matter what's going on in your life, no matter what's going on in your family, how you live that faith in front of your family will change things. Your role in your faith in your family will determine some of the things about the future of your family as well. Jesus knew this, and he talked about it with the people who were just like family, the people closest to him. And one of the things he highlighted for the people closest to him, and is important for your family too, is that love matters most. When it comes to your family, love matters most. More so than even your ability to be right. Love matters most, more than you getting your way, more than your independence, more than your style, more than how your family may embarrass you at times. It doesn't matter. Love matters most. And we challenged you last week to think about who in your family, who in your life as your family, who lives with you, who's a part of that unit, challenges you the most. They may be the person you need to practice that love with more than anybody else. The person that you connect with real easy isn't the person that's difficult to practice love with, nor is it probably the area which you need to grow in love. But the people that are difficult in your family, the one that when you get into a room with them, there's gonna be fireworks. That's the person that maybe you need to practice that love with the most. And this week I wanna start off with this statement. When we're young, we see nothing wrong with our family. When we're young, we don't see anything wrong with our family. In fact, we may exactly believe that our family is perfect. We express love and we feel loved. The couch is a playground, dinner is at 6, dad is home around that time, and everything is great. No matter how you looked at it, no matter how your family is defined, you probably looked at your family and go, I can't pick out anything wrong with my family. In fact, as you got older and you hung around your friends and their families, you may have started to realize maybe your family's not perfect, but there are no perfect families. That it wasn't a comparison game that, man, I wish I lived in their family. You started to realize, even if I did live in their family, the same disagreements and tension that live in my house live in their house too, and there are no perfect families. Now that's an easy statement, but let me put it a different way. Let me put it like this. Every family is fractured. Now you might look at that and go, good grief, Kyle, my family's not fractured. We love each other and we have our problems, but we're not broken. We're not fractured. But let me put it this way. Just like with a bone fracture, there are different grades of fractures, like this. Inside your family, just like inside of a fracture in a bone, there's a different scale, there's a different grade. Like with your bones, there might be spider web cracks, very small cracks inside of a bone that still register as a fracture, all the way to a complete snap in half with a bone. Now, I've never broken a bone, so I don't know what that pain feels like, but I have had sprains before. I have had difficulty with bones in my body. Because of that, fractures register. Your family is fractured on some level. A lot of families have a fracture on a very small sense that might just be tension, things they don't talk about, things with personalities, things with roles in the family that cause tension. There may be other parts of tension, there might be other parts of being a fractured family that looks like yelling. When you walk into that house, the volume is up because the level of emotion. Now in some families, things get so bad that these fractures that might be spider webs for some turn into others, divorce. where a family goes beyond just having tensions and trying to manage personalities all the way to something is completely broken in half, and now there are two where there should be one. Now again, just like with bone fractures, if you did have an arm or a leg that had a fracture in it, standard medical procedure is not immediately to cut that limb off. So if you had a fracture in your arm, you wouldn't go to the doctor and agree to having your arm cut off just because you have a small fracture in your arm. Even if you had a complete break in your arm and the doctor said it's time to cut off that limb, you'd ask the question, are we in the Civil War? Is it so bad that you have to cut off my limb because there's no chance of it being healed? Not at all. But sometimes that's exactly what we do with our families. In fact, sometimes we make the decision to count them out, or we'll count ourselves out. We take the limb that's broken, we take our family, and we begin to separate ourselves from them, just like amputating an arm. But it's an overreaction to where we're at. We may count ourselves out. We may take time to isolate ourselves. When we see some of the tensions rise up, when we see the things that are fractures in our family, we may just take the moment to put the headphones on, to go to our room, to get in the car, and to get away from things. But that's not a healthy practice for our family. It's certainly not gonna make things better, and it's so dramatic that it's unnecessary. But sometimes we also count them out. We may look at our family and go, okay, this is never gonna get better. We're never gonna find a good spot, and so I just need to count the days until I'm out of this relationship. I'm out of this house, and maybe one day I'll be out of this family. But that's not the best way forward. In fact, there's good news and bad news when it comes to families and fractures. The bad news is families have always been fractured, and that is bad news, that families have always been fractured. They are fractured now, and they will be fractured in the future. But the good news is there's hope. No matter what kind of fracture there is, no matter the fact that families have been fractured for a long time, there is hope going forward. In fact, one of the most famous families in the Bible, one of the most important families in the Bible, one of the most well-known families in the Bible was completely fractured, way beyond just a simple break. They may have been more of a compound fracture where there's blood and bone sticking out. However, there was tremendous blessing and hope that came with their family. It all started in Genesis 25, and it looks like this. And when time came to give birth, Rebecca discovered that she indeed did have twins. So if you don't know anything about this story, you have Abraham, which most people have heard of. God made an agreement with him to make him awesome, make him rich, make him own a lot of land with a lot of kids, and God would bless him specifically around other people. That sounds like a great agreement. But Abraham didn't have a kid for a while until he had Isaac. Now, Isaac is the husband of Rebecca. She gets pregnant and she realizes that there's 2 kids inside of her. She is pregnant with twins, and it confirms it. When the time came to give birth to Rebecca, she discovered that she indeed did have twins. The first one was very red at birth and covered with thick hair like a fur coat. Now that seems like an odd detail to throw in there, but it becomes important as they describe Esau and his brother in just a moment. So they named him Esau, which is red. Then the other twin was born with his hand grasping Esau's heel. Again, a weird birth note, but watch what happens. So they named him Jacob. Jacob is, it seems like it's grasping, but it can also mean like deceiving. Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. There's a few things going on here that carry a lot of weight going forward. They were twins, so they were born at the same time, even though Esau was first. They were very different, and it seems like Jacob was up to something. In fact, the next part of description for them as they get older highlights all 3 of these. It says this: as the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman. This just reeks of like masculinity. This guy was tough, he was rough and tumble, and he was out in the woods doing adventurous things. But Jacob, and this is the second one that came out, Jacob had a quiet temperament. So he was gentle, he was kind, preferring to stay home. He didn't go on adventures, he stayed home. Now in our culture, we've got some things to say about this, but for them it was even more so. The men went out in the fields, the men went out and did the rough and tumble work, and the women had stayed home. And for Jacob, he would have stayed home and maybe taken on some of those attributes, that he was gentle, he was kind, he liked to cook, which is coming up. Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought home, but Rebecca loved Jacob. Man, if you thought this was particular about your family, this is ancient families, the same thing is going on. Mom and dad connect to their kids very differently, and it's nobody's fault, but it does speak to a chance that fractures can get created, just like in their family. In fact, there's a moment here, there's a story we're about to read. There's a few sentences that seem maybe inconsequential to us, but begin the story of Isaac's family that can say something to you and I with our fractures. And this is what starts. One day when Jacob was cooking some stew, he had stayed at home. Esau arrived home from the wilderness. There you go. Those are the two personalities that got drawn out. They were twins, but they were completely different. From the wilderness, exhausted and hungry. And Esau said to Jacob, "I'm starved. Give me some of that stew." This is how Esau got his other name, Edom, which means red. The red stew that was there. I don't know what the connection with red is, but Esau was red when he came out, and he wanted that red stew because he was out in the wilderness. Maybe he was a redneck kind of guy, but he wanted that. And Jacob sees a moment here, and Jacob says, "All right," Jacob replied, "but rather trade me rights as the firstborn son." Let me highlight that in a second. "Look, I'm dying of starvation," says Esau. "What good is my birthright to me now?" The birthrights and rights of the firstborn son don't really speak to our culture, but to them, something about being a firstborn was drastically important, and it was this. If you had the rights of the firstborn, you had a birthright, which means dad gave you more land, more money. In fact, it wasn't just more, it was double. You had double the land, double the money, and you got the position of authority in your family once dad was gone. So you got to make even bigger decisions and potentially cheat your brothers and sisters out of the stuff that mom and dad had promised them. And now this is a specific family too, because God had promised Abraham that he was going to do something great with him. That got passed down to Isaac and was going to the number one son in their family, the birthright, the firstborn son. And so just because they were firstborn would have been enough, but the fact that God was doing specific things that would affect their family for thousands of generations put even more importance on the birthright. So no wonder Jacob wanted God's specific blessing on his life that would favor him over all others, plus more land, plus more money, plus more authority, altogether more power over his brother. Add into the fact that Jacob was a twin. So it wasn't just that he was born second, but it was almost like he was not two, he was 1A and 1B. I'm the firstborn son too. It just so happened that I was on my way out after my brother. That kind of chance of luck may have seemed something really unfair to Jacob. Esau also exaggerates what's going on in his life. "Look, I'm dying of starvation," says Esau. "What good is my birthright to me now?" When we read this, yeah, he may be actually dying of starvation, but the context being that there's not just one tent. This isn't the only food that they have. He could have gone one tent over. They were a rich family and gotten more food. It looks like Esau's exaggerating what's going on. You and I have never done that, right? I'm dying of starvation. I haven't eaten in 8 hours, and if I don't get something to eat, I'm gonna die. People have been exaggerating for a long time, and for Esau, he may have just been exaggerating to get what his brother had. Ever wanted that? Something that somebody else had just because they had it? For Esau, he may have been being the older brother who bullies. But the point of all of this is not whether or not that was a literal dying, but how important that birthright was to Jacob and was unimportant to Esau. What good is my birthright to me now? In fact, it mattered to Jacob so much that he took a moment to push the point forward. But Jacob said, "First you must swear to me that your birthright is mine." So Esau swore an oath there by selling his birthright, all his rights as the firstborn, to his brother Jacob. Maybe in the moment, this didn't seem like a big deal to Esau because he was really hungry. But this, for you and I, is like a legal contract. There may have in fact been witnesses that watched them take a moment of selling the birthright to the brother. So that way, nobody could lie about it going forward. That Esau sold his birthright to Jacob, not in a, yeah, sure, whatever moment. No. I want a formal swear that you are going to allow me to be the firstborn son and take the rights as the firstborn son. And Esau does exactly that. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. This is the stew that was in front of them. Hey, give it to me. Okay, it's yours now. Esau ate the meal, then he got up and he left. He was done with it. There was no emotion, there was no hope for the future, there was nothing. In fact, he showed contempt for his rights as the firstborn. Not going forward, but in that moment, Esau showed contempt for his birthright. It would be something like this. Abraham handed down to Isaac an agreement with God that he was doing something powerful in their family. And Esau, instead of realizing the importance of that, treated eternal value like fast food. Cheap, expendable, nothing important I need to worry about. Again, this seems like just a simple meal between two brothers that turns into something bigger. but it speaks to the fact that small problems can turn into big fractures. For the two of them, this wasn't just a one-time thing. In fact, this turns into something over time with huge repercussions for thousands of generations. And what they saw, they wouldn't have seen the thousands of generations in front of them, but what they saw in front of them over the next few years would have been horrible, because time doesn't heal wounds, it grows them. It happened like this. There was tension in the beginning between the two of them. They were different people and they liked different things, and their family, their parents, may have built that into them, how different and how loved each of them were as opposed to each other. And it turned that favorites into bitterness. Jacob held on to a little bit of that bitterness, and he exploited a weakness in his brother to gain the upper hand. Then there was cheating involved. This wasn't just one time, this led onward. This cheating turned into Jacob dressing up as his brother in front of his blind father, lying to his blind father to get the blessing because Esau wasn't going to honor their agreement. So there's more cheating, more lying, and more problems. Then it turns into a conspiracy between Mom and Jacob, that Esau is so mad at this that he wants to kill him. So now there's lying, cheating, murder, bitterness, favorites, and tension that turns into murder, which then turns into Jacob's adventures of robbery, almost kidnapping, slavery. One moment in time, one small fracture turned into something very, very dangerous for an entire family and for thousands of generations to come. If you read the stories, you find out that the repercussions between the relationship of Jacob and Esau and what seemed like such small fractures turned into national crises. Why is this family in the Bible of all things? Why is this family highlighted? It certainly can't be a model for us to follow, right? That's absolutely true. We are not supposed to look at this family and go, hey, we'll pick favorites, we'll play to them, we'll let tensions and bitterness arise, and then we'll just have big fights and fractures and Thanksgiving will be awful. That's not the hope at all. In fact, this family is mentioned again later in the Bible, and it says something like this. It was by faith that Isaac promised blessing to the future of his sons, Jacob and Esau. By faith. It was by faith that Jacob, when he was old and dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and bowed in worship as he leaned on his staff. This family is mentioned again in Hebrews 11, a part of the Bible where they're highlighting people of great faith. Even though they had a long line of tension, bitterness, and fractures in their family, God still took time, and the writers of Hebrews still took time to mention how filled with faith these people were. Not as a highlight of how great they were, but how awesome God is and how great He can work in families even though they're fractured. In fact, let me put it this way. Your family matters to God even when it's fractured. Even in the moments you might have looked at your family, your extended family, the people around you who are close to you and said, we're done. This isn't great. I just need to wait till I get out of this. Or I need to wait this problem out until it goes away, which we know isn't going to work. God isn't done with us yet. God isn't done with us, and He certainly isn't done with our family. And if we take the time to count ourselves out or count our family out, we are cheating the people around us of the working grace of God. So here's the question. Have you counted yourself out? Have you counted your family out? Have you ducked your head and walked to your room when you had an opportunity to show love to your family? When there was a moment you could have shown trust and grace, instead did you write them off because of what they did to you in the past? Have you looked at your family and said, this doesn't matter, I just need to wait until this is over? God hasn't, and He's not going to either, and neither should we. In fact, the story of Jacob and Esau and Isaac's family highlights something that you and I can take this week into our family. This week as we walk into our family, we can take one principle, and it's this. Fractures can be healed with forgiveness. Fractures in a family can be healed with forgiveness, asking and giving. In fact, there were a few times over Jacob's life as he was a deceiver and walked away, as he lied to people, as he manipulated people, the moments he was caught, the moments when it was most important, Jacob would turn around and apologize. Now, he continued to trip up, and his family had to work through trust issues with him, but God recognized Jacob's heart towards his family, which was asking and giving forgiveness. In fact, you can read it for yourself. It's a fascinating tale, a story of how Jacob and Esau find each other again after Jacob runs away. And it all starts the healing with forgiveness. Maybe in your family you need to start and look at the people around you and who do I need to forgive? Who has hurt me the most and who do I need to forgive? That's a moment you probably need in your room alone because you need to take time to forgive. I've got 4 children. There are times that I need to take alone and say, I forgive them for what they said or did. There's times that people have had to do that for me and my family. I forgive Kyle for what he has said or did. And what we've found is that healing in the fractures can come from forgiveness. Can you imagine if apologies and forgiveness were the standard in your family, not the exception? If they were the rule in your family, not the exception. If they were the practice in your family, not the exception. This may just be the practice field for us as we head out into the world, as we take Jesus' message into the world, as we show Jesus' love to the world. Apologies and forgiveness. What would our nation look like right now if apologies and forgiveness were the rule, not the exception? What would your school look like right now if you carried into it apologies and forgiveness? If they were the rule, if they were the standard, not the exception. Could you imagine what your friends would look like if apologies and forgiveness were the rule, not the exception? We might find a different world that has a little bit more light and has a little bit more grace inside of it. Your family matters to God, even if it doesn't to you. Oh man, I want to cut that out. Your family matters to God even when it's fractured. Your family matters to God even when it's fractured.